collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we discuss issues relating to access rights for migrants and refugees, with panellists from a conference held in Nicosia last week that looked at action on the ground and policy change. Among them, AKEL MP Eleni Mavrou.
I think that the main problem in dealing with asylum seekers, with refugees, with migrants, is the lack of a comprehensive policy.
The new head of the UNHCR in Cyprus.
And then there are others who are clearly refugees, like people who are coming from Syria. They are refugees just for the fact of being Syrians because they are fleeing a war. So these individuals also should go through accelerated procedures and have a very quick response.
And an executive committee member of Euromed Rights.
Reception have to be always with integration practice. That is mean classes of languages, training, the possibility to enter in the labor market, of course the right to work.
And we'll end on a lighter note on the topic of upcycling, talking to people who are making shelters for the homeless out of plastic bottles.
We want to test it with people we know that are living in the city of Nicosia and they are without shelter.
KISA, the local NGO for equality support and anti-racism, organised an event recently at which there were several speakers from across Europe. Access rights for migrants and refugees in Cyprus was the title of the conference, and on the first panel of the afternoon, one of the speakers was Eleni Mavrou, who is chair of the Standing Committee on Internal Affairs at our House of Representatives. When I spoke to her afterwards, she outlined what she'd been trying to say.
We could talk for hours about the delays in reviewing applications, about the inadequate funds available, the difficulty in finding housing or employment. But I think that the main problem in dealing with asylum seekers, with refugees, with migrants, is the lack of a comprehensive policy of each and every department, service in the government, knowing what is expected from them and making sure that this is known and understood by the people who require their services. So, yes, I think this is the main problem. Other than that, I think that we should stress at the same time the need to create a culture, a welcoming culture in the local population, helping people understand that refugees or even migrants are a plus to the society and not a drain to government funds or labour opportunities.
It's extraordinary to me, Eleni, that when you think back to even the 50s, the 60s, and then, of course, 74, the number of Cypriots who migrated to other countries, Australia, the UK particularly, who were welcomed with open arms and who went on to make very good lives for themselves. We have our own people who showed us how this can be done. Why is it that we don't seem to understand that in Cyprus?
Okay, people forget easily, and I think that fear, especially if it's cultivated by people in public positions, is a very strong sentiment. We've been through an economic crisis. A lot of people lost their work, their job, or they're afraid of losing their house. It's easy to find a scapegoat in refugees and asylum seekers instead of trying to find what went wrong within our society to reach this point. And I don't think it's a Cyprus phenomenon only. Unfortunately, this is a phenomenon nowadays quite common in Europe. We see the xenophobic governments in Hungary, in Austria, even Scandinavian countries who are considered much more open and tolerant are witnessing now this kind of xenophobic rhetoric and political positions.
Have you got an answer? What's to be done?
I think it's important, especially for people in public positions, to help people understand the realities that refugees, migrants are a plus to the society. They are not only helping the economy, which they do, but at the same time they give us the opportunity to open our horizons, to enrich our culture with the culture of other people.
I just have to ask you one other thing. You were formerly the Minister of the Interior, and at the beginning you were talking about this need to get some sort of cohesive policy.
Yeah.
Why didn't you do it when you were Minister?
But that's one of the things I raised during the debate. For example...
But why is it taking so long to put this in place?
There was a strategic plan, for example, for integration of migrants and refugees. It was the first strategic plan. There were weaknesses and gaps that we needed to fill in, but we had a framework at least within which to work. Unfortunately, this strategic plan has been abandoned. We just heard from the representative of the Ministry of the Interior that they are now discussing a new plan. I don't know when and what is the content, but I think it is important to build on something cohesive and something concrete. And that's what we tried to do in the past.
MP Eleni Mavrou, who is chair of the Standing Committee on Internal Affairs at the Cyprus House of Representatives.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Another panellist at that Access Rights for Migrants and Refugees in Cyprus conference that took place recently in Nicosia was the representative of the UNHCR in Cyprus. She is Katja Sacha, and she joins us now. Katja, you were talking about protection challenges in Cyprus, particularly in the context of the regional crisis. What did you mean by that? What are the challenges, and are they different here from in other places?
The challenges, I would say that the first challenge for any refugee or an asylum seeker in any given country is the public opinion. So without welcoming communities and without favourable public opinion, it is extremely difficult for anybody to feel welcomed and to be able to start a new life.
And that means that if they're not feeling welcomed, I suppose the trauma, particularly if they've come from a war zone, continues because they're never quite sure how they're going to be treated.
Absolutely, and this is the other issue that is very high on our agenda here in Cyprus. It's how to identify the most vulnerable individuals when they come. So we strongly encourage the government to put in place this kind of an early identification system so that those individuals who really have severe traumas or suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, they do receive adequate counselling and adequate assistance for their special needs.
And how easy is it to identify the particularly vulnerable?
Well, some vulnerabilities are visible disabilities, but some are not. So it is extremely difficult. It is not just by looking at the person or asking how did you or did you go through a trauma that you will identify someone. And one of the symptoms of the post-traumatic stress disorder is also the fact that the person will have difficulties answering questions in a logical manner. So it makes the identification even more difficult. So yes, you do need specialized specialized staff to go through these kind of interviews.
So how do other countries handle this? Does it mean that when the application is made and the first contact is made with the authorities here dealing with an asylum request, that there should, for example, be a psychologist present?
Not necessarily psychologist, ideally yes, but I mean vulnerabilities can be anything. They can be medical vulnerabilities, or they can be just simply a young mother alone with a number of children, or it can be a trauma. So it really depends on the type of vulnerability, or it might be a sexual orientation that makes the person very vulnerable in a certain environment. So it's a skill that we teach how to we can help with checklists. What are the questions to be asked? And what normally happens is when the person first approaches either an immigration police officer or a social worker or whomever it is, somebody who works for the asylum service, whoever is the first person in line to receive asylum seekers, this person will need to have these skills.
Let's assume they've got those skills. One of the things that came out of the panel was the backlog of applications and the length of time it is taking the authorities here to deal with them. That's not doing the asylum seeker any favour, but it's also not doing Cyprus any favours either. How do we get over that problem?
Well, I hope that we are getting over that problem. Actually, the number is 8,000 individuals who are waiting for final decisions for their asylum claims. I think it's a situation that needs to be addressed at the first instance, first by putting in place accelerated procedures. Half of those who seek asylum in Cyprus come from countries that do not traditionally produce refugees. So for these population groups, people who come from countries such as India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and others who might not have international protection needs, they should not come to this process at all. So there are systems that can be put in place to identify these kind of cases, what we call that are clearly not well-founded cases, and to have a very quick determination and a final decision for their cases.
And what happens to them if they are, in a sense, not entitled to asylum or refugee status?
Then that's a migration management issue. So there are other organizations who offer, for example, IOM, who offer a voluntary return packages for these kind of individuals. But what is of interest to us, to UNHCR, is that these systems, the asylum system, quickly responds to those who do have protection needs. And this means that there also needs to be accelerated procedures to identify those, first of all, like I said, those who are vulnerable, who cannot wait for years to be addressed because of the distress that they are experiencing. And then there are others who are clearly refugees, like people who are coming from Syria. They are refugees just for the fact of being Syrians because they are fleeing a war. So these individuals also should go through accelerated procedures and have a very quick response. And this would just leave a number of individuals who come from countries that do produce refugees, but that decision needs to be taken after a careful individual examination of the asylum claims, like people from Afghanistan, from Iran, from Iraq, some countries in Africa, and they could go through these regular procedures that at the moment are applied for everyone.
Right, let's talk for a moment about Syrians, because they tend to be the majority with what's been going on in our neighbouring country. And it seems to me from the figures that I've seen, certainly over the last 4 or 5 years, that the tendency in Cyprus seems to be to give Syrian asylum seekers subsidiary protection. And that is not the same thing, is it? Can you explain the difference and whether or not that, in fact, prevents them from, in a sense, moving on?
Well, there is a big difference, but that is mainly one difference between refugees and those who receive subsidiary protection in Cyprus, and that is the fact that those with subsidiary protection are not entitled for family reunification. And this is the big reason. 95% of Syrians who come to Cyprus to seek asylum, they are considered who receive then subsidiary protection status. And this means that these individuals are unable to have their families join them in legal way in Cyprus.
And so is that fair?
It is not in UNHCR's policy. We do recommend the government to give Syrians refugee status because for us, they are refugees. There are two countries in Europe who have this policy, and it is Malta and Cyprus. As there are some other countries that do put some kind of limits, for example, that those who are considered subsidiary protection beneficiaries, they will need to wait 1, 2 or 3 years before they can have their family members join them. But there are only two countries, Malta and Cyprus, who do not allow any kind of a legal family unification.
And it seems that probably that's because we're hoping as soon as things calm down in Syria that they'll go back where they came from. We've been talking to the new representative of the UNHCR in Cyprus, Katja Saha.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Sara Prestiani is an executive committee member of Euromed Rights, and she joins us now to talk about the problems of integration and mobility, part of the EU migration agenda. Sara, you're with an NGO in Italy, and of course Italy has been at the forefront really over the last few years of migration, particularly from North Africa. So what would you say is best practice when you're dealing with huge numbers of people coming in?
The first best practice is to start to think about not only number, as may too often done by Italian government, but to people, women, men, children, most of them in need of international protection. The other important thing is the fact to take into account the fact that people still arrive because they fly difficult situation in their country, war, poverty, and so many reasons. So the only way is to open legal way, because if there are no legal way, the only solutions people will take boats and risk their life in the sea, as we can see in Italy. But in the time we have seen a huge number of arrival with Albanian people in 90, and now with the people from Africa. One of the best practices that we can develop is the idea of a reception system. A reception system have to be the more little and spread around the country. We see that big camps not taking account of personal situation, and reception have to be always with integration practice. That is mean classes of languages, training, the possibility to enter in the labor market, of course, the right to work, and the psychological assistance also, because we see that most of the people arriving in Italy have suffered torture in Libya. So in that way, people can be integrated more rapidly and can be enter in the Italian life more easily.
Let me just ask you this, though. A boat arrives. The people are offloaded and they go to one of these reception centres. I'm presuming that then each application is looked at, and some will be granted asylum and allowed to stay, but others won't. So at what point do the language lessons and everything else kick in? For example, how long does it take for those applications to be processed in Italy? Because here in Cyprus it takes forever.
In Italy, the time is more or less 2 years, and it's during this time that all these tools have to be done, because, have to be honest, most of the people will stay in Italy in any case. So are some skills that you can give also in the first times that you arrive. In Italy, what happened when boats arrive? Before 1 year, they enter in a big center in Lampedusa or in Sicily, just a few days, and then they are spread all around Italy in different camps. In some, they are absolutely different, so it's also by chance that there are good camps and bad camps. Good reception system, because there are a little one taking account personal history, a big one that really cannot follow each case.
Who runs the camps?
organization and association. There are two kind of camps. There is a camps managed by the municipality. That is the word for me. It's best practice because there is a relation with the municipality, but they are concretely run by association. And then there are other camps that are under the control of Minister of Interior. They are also run by association, but the possibility to run these camps are with less transparency. So in some cases there are like business also in this kind of reception. So that is change to city to another, from a camp to another, also because it's up to who run the camps. If won't really make a good work for refugee, or just won't make business with refugees. So it's quite different. Now when migrants arrive, because the European Commission imposed what we call the hotspot approach, they arrive in a hotspot, a place where they are identified, fingerprints are taken for Dublin regulation, and there they make them some question, and sometimes up to nationality they are considered as asylum seekers, so they enter in asylum system, or they consider a migrant, so they receive a paper that they say to them, you have to leave the country in 7 days. That is a kind of expulsion paper.
But where can they go with that expulsion paper? Do they try and go to a different European country, or do they have to leave and go back to North Africa?
No one, of course, will go back. Most of them enter in what we can call the legal people in Italy and try to find a way to survive. Try to go in another country. That is the big problem, that from the moment that hotspot approach have been approved, most of them try to go in another country, but they always send back to Italy because their fingerprint have been registered when they enter in Italy. So we look at all the borders, people, especially in this day with winter, and there are a lot of people still trying to cross the border and to go to France and Austria and still go to England and other countries. The problem is that most of them will be sent back in Italy.
You've worked in this area for some time. Just tell me very quickly what you would like to see to improve the chances and the future for these people who arrive on our shores from war-torn countries or being persecuted for their sexual orientation or whatever it happens to be. They're looking for a way to continue their life with some positivity. What can we do to help?
I think that the first point it will be to oblige member states to respect the international convention they have seen and the right that migrant refugees have. It's not the case now. People are let die in the sea. This is the violation of right of life. People are pushed back when they are asylum seekers. It's the systematic violation of Geneva Convention. So the first moment I would like that their right will be respected. And the second thing is they have been considered as human beings with hope, with the past, a difficult past most of the case, and with the future. That is completely changed most of the European and also national policy on migration. That is mean to not focus only to externalization of policy, try to push back them in transit country, try to send back them again, to not let them enter, but to try to find a solution to integrate them into Europe with the solidarity approach among member states, and not just oblige them to stay in Cyprus, Spain, Italy or Greece because they are the first line country. All member states have to make their part, and only in that case we will see that the number of people arriving are really few comparating of millions of people present in Lebanon or in Turkey or in other countries. So Europe can do that. Europe can integrate and have a good migration policy, and they have to respect them as human beings. If they will not do that, racism, xenophobia and systematic violation of human rights will be always there and will be a danger not only for migrants but also for our democracy.
And that is Sara Prestiani from Arci, which is an Italian NGO. She's also an executive committee member of Euromed Rights.
Get in touch with the Cyprus News Digest by emailing cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
We've spoken before on the programme about homeless people sleeping rough in our parks. Not a joke as the nights get colder. My final guests today are Evdokia Dimitriou and Alexandros Pelletier. They've been running upcycling workshops to teach people how to construct shelters out of plastic bottles. Evdokia explains.
Basically, this idea started when I was living in Athens, because in Athens there are many, many homeless people. And it started as a very simple idea to find a way to build a zero-cost shelter for the homeless. And because I worked to one-to-one structures before at the university when I was studying architecture, it didn't seem a very difficult mission. So I started collecting plastic bottles, which was the only way I could figure out how to build it and have it as a zero-cost shelter. And when I started working on it, very randomly I met also people from South Africa who wanted to be part of the project. And we traveled all the way to Johannesburg, where we worked on the structure. We finished it, and we even donated to a community there. And today I'm hosted by Alexandros in his premises of Tessoura, where we're again testing the structure and how to build it and even make it more effective. And since Alexandros is also using the concept of upcycling and he's very interested in the idea, we put our passions together and we're trying to bring awareness also to the people in Cyprus, because homelessness is a problem that is also rising now in Cyprus.
Now then, the idea, I think, was that you invited everybody to come down to the Tessoura workshop in the old municipal market to bring as many plastic bottles as they could and then to help you construct these shelters. How long does it take to make one?
So far we've been building a structure for the last 2 days, and we hope to be continuing until the end of the week.
How many do you think you'll make in that time?
1.
So we need to speed this up. Any ideas about how you can do that, and indeed who you will give it to when you've finished it?
Actually, the structure is on a prototype phase, so we don't care so much about time. We just want to test it and see how good it is. Again,
does that mean you're going to sleep out one night in it?
If we have to, yes. We want to try it anyway. And also we want to test it with people we know that are living in the city of Nicosia and they are without shelter.
Have you any idea how many homeless we have in Nicosia?
We know that locals, they're not more than 10, but that's a more or less answer. But also there's a lot of people that are asylum seekers that we have no idea the number of them.
So presumably it would be nice if they would come down and help you as well. You're doing this throughout the week, and I think it finished on Friday. So are you going to continue to do this if it works well?
Yeah, the idea is we do want the homeless people or whoever is seeking asylum to come and learn the technique, because the idea was to show them a way how to do the structures, not just donate it to them.
So that they could, in fact, make their own shelters as winter draws on.
Yes, and also because many times we forget that homeless people are humans, they're just lost on the streets, and sometimes they're just lacking that connection with other people. And this is also a way to bring them and start interacting with other people and with us, of course.
And to give them a meaning to their life, I
course.
suppose, because it's quite important to be busy, isn't it,
Yes.
when you're feeling a bit down.
And if you allow me, the place of Agora, which we are running until the end of the year, it's also working a lot with social issues and so on. So every day, more or less, we have people that are asylum seekers, and not only that, they are in need of some of them, some structure. And actually yesterday on our workshop we had some people that are homeless or that are living in abandoned houses in Nicosia. So we were very glad to have these people around us yesterday.
How often does this space open? It's usually only in the evenings, I think, is it?
Yes. On Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Agora is open from 11 until 1, and then again from 3 until 12 o'clock at night. Shops close at 8 o'clock. On December, we'll be open every day.
And every night, I suppose, because again, it's a nice covered space where at least until midnight people can meet other people,
Exactly.
have a chat, maybe a cup of coffee and keep warm.
Exactly.
Fantastic idea. If you haven't visited the old marketplace in the centre of Old Nicosia, it's right next door to what is the new municipality building. Go and check it out. There's lots of fancy things down there and a warm welcome. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.